You and I will just stand down on the border. Okay, so is there a more important thing than indoctrination on our campuses? Our kids are going to indoctrination schools. It is pure propaganda, it is disgusting what is happening, and it is trying to rend the fabric of the American student. And they understand on the left that you gotta get to the brains while they're young and while they're malleable. And that's why they use the campus as propaganda, indoctrination bubbles. And it's terrible. On Turning Point USA, we are on these campuses every single day. We fight, and by the way, it is a very, very tough fight because you are outnumbered 1,000 to 1 on these campuses, sometimes worse. But thank God for the group that we are bringing up next, because this group, this panel, are fighters, every single last one of them. They are the people that are waging the war for the souls of our students and the souls of our campuses, and it is such an honor to introduce this panel, because they are fighting lockstep with us at Turning Point to try and affect the propaganda chamber of the establishment education. So it is my absolute pleasure to bring up Traci Belmonte. Traci is a former school teacher. She tells me backstage that she likes to wear sequins. I don't know if those two things mixed, if she was a teacher that wore sequins. I'm not sure. But she has a wonderful little puppy, okay, by the name of Sophia Loren. So let's welcome dog owner and educator, Traci.
Thank you. Good afternoon, MAGA Patriots. How are you today? Okay. Now, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever felt that a left-wing teacher or professor tried to indoctrinate you in class? Show of hands? Okay. That's a good number of people. And I'm here to tell you it definitely exists. I've been a public school teacher in New York State for 21 years. Do you know what it's like being a conservative teacher in New York? Your thoughts and prayers are definitely appreciated. Now, I hesitate to use the word public when we speak about schools, because besides the tax-paying public paying for schools, you have absolutely no say on what's being taught in your schools. Okay, absolutely no say. Schools have become left-wing indoctrination centers, and they're that way by design. And we're going to get into that. And we're going to also talk about how these left-wing ideologies have led to our schools being less safe. So please, let me introduce my panel. They are rock stars. I couldn't put together a better group of people if I tried. First up, Jonathan Gilliam. He's our fill-in MC this afternoon. He's also a former Navy SEAL, FBI agent, Air Marshal, and author of the book, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. Please welcome Jonathan. Come on up.
Thank you.
Next up, Dr. Shiva. He is an American success story. He emigrated from India at the age of 7 and went on to invent email at the age of 14. So if your email inboxes are full, he's the man to blame. He also holds 4 degrees from MIT, and he's currently running for Senate in Massachusetts. Please welcome Dr. Shiva. And last, but certainly not least, Andrew Pollack is a man who turned his unimaginable suffering into positive action. His beautiful daughter, Meadow, was murdered during the Parkland High School shooting. Andrew has now dedicated his life to school safety and is the author of the book, Why Meadow Died: The People and Policies That Created the Parkland Shooter and Endanger America's Students. Please welcome Andrew. Wow, this is like outnumbered, except I'm one lucky girl. Now, so how did we go from the envy of the world to an indoctrinated mess? It was by design. Our entire school system, most people don't know this, but our entire school system was modeled on totalitarian regimes' school systems. John Dewey, not to be confused with the man who invented the Dewey Decimal System, was actually a card-carrying communist and went over to China and saw what went on in their schools to bring it here to America. And we have statues to this man. I know, nobody knows this. These are the statues, coincidentally, that don't get taken down, card-carrying communists. So anyway, Jonathan, I listen to you on TV and radio, and you do such a great job of explaining how communism is creeping into our schools and affecting our kids and, of course, our society. Can you explain?
Well, first of all, the guy who invented the Dewey Decimal System is an evil man, right? Should have just been alphabetical order, I think. I don't know what this whole system is. That right there tells you that he's evil. No, but, it's a very interesting topic when we talk about education and communism and the creep of communism. We can go back to Saul Alinsky. We can go even further back to that, where these people started secreting themselves into Hollywood, into the education system, to systematically, ideologically change the country and the Constitution. And you have to remember that. I was on a panel earlier, and I was explaining that many of the things that the country believes, especially young people, that they believe about the Constitution is false. They believe that the Second Amendment many of the young kids out there believe we don't need it anymore because they've been indoctrinated to believe that. They think that the government's going to take care of them. We know that never works out right. So this creep of communism has been going on for a long time. What I can truly say, though, is the first time in our history, this president in recent years has mentioned the word communism, and he also caused these people, President Trump, systematically caused them to freak out, and they've exposed themselves. And I think, if anything, of all the things he's done, that's probably one of the greatest things he's done.
Wow. Thank you, Jonathan, definitely. Now, Common Core, does anybody know what it is? No, a few people do. Oh, great. Because most of the time when I ask people what Common Core is, they have no idea. It's a way to indoctrinate kids, I'll tell you that. Now, in 2009, states signed on to Common Core to get stimulus money from the Obama administration. Common Core wasn't even written in 2009 yet, so they signed on to its sight unseen. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Bill Gates, who was instrumental in getting Common Core into our schools, he put $6 billion of his own dollars into Common Core, signed a contract with the UN. Signed a contract with the UN to get the Common Core in every school in the entire world. In fact, Common Core is being taught in other countries, including the Middle East. Now, if that doesn't terrify you, it really should. So, Dr. Shiva, I wanted to go to you and get your thoughts on this.
Anyway, it's great to be here. Look, there's been a lot of talk, in some of the panels on what we call fake news. One of the important things to understand is that there's something even more deeper than fake news, what I call fake science, in the academic system. If you go back and look at around 1970, there was an amendment passed called the Mansfield Amendment, and it moved a significant amount of dollars in research and education, particularly in research, to the National Science Foundation. And what occurred as a result of that was that academia essentially became the oldest profession in the world. You can all think about what that is. But so the academic world essentially is the world that defines, Common Core. It's the one that defines narratives. And so in the United States, starting in 1970, because of that movement of money, academics essentially became pay-to-play science or pay-to-play in any aspect of building narratives. So they're actually the underlying piece, behind fake news. So as a part of that, the reason it relates to this is if you take someone like Bill Gates, with his enormous wealth, he's able to influence massive amount of public policy. So if you look at any major issue, be it climate change, genetic engineering, vaccines, education, Gates essentially funds, through his friend, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein, he funded a lot of money through Jeffrey Epstein at MIT and Harvard. He was his agent, how people are instilled with knowledge. So we have to really go and we have to lift up the hood of fake news, and you find out that, if ignorance is a cause of all suffering, there are people who promote ignorance. And people like Bill Gates, he's at the center of this. So how the kids get indoctrinated, be it taking I think that young 11-year-old girl, getting her all hyped up to convince us that the world is going to end tomorrow. This all comes from a model of what you call the aristocracy, like Bill Gates or Elizabeth Warren. A set of people who think that they know better than anyone else, that they are the ones who can determine what is right and what's wrong, and that they're the ones who can determine the trajectory of education. So we really have to go and look at where all this comes from, and it really comes from, I could give you a longitude and a latitude. It's 42 degrees north, 71 degrees west, which is the intersection of MIT and Harvard. But that's where the deep state is. That set of people are the people that create all of the fundamental knowledge that pollutes and essentially manipulates young people in this world today.
Can I add one thing to that? I said when I was in the FBI, I was a representative to the United Nations General Assembly for several years, and I watched a panel of Bill Gates, Harmy Karzai, and a couple other wealthier world leaders, and then a whole group of people who were mega rich. And the topic was world hunger. Not once did they have a solution to world hunger. It was all about raising money. And that's the interesting thing about this, is that when we look at the indoctrination of these kids and all these things, there's never a solution. There's no solutions in anything that they put out there. It just pushes everybody to the ideology that they're projecting.
Well, one of the biggest solutions they have is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's to essentially scare people. So if you look at that young child who is basically exploited at the UN, the entire basis of that is fear. Fear, 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 so you get people afraid. It's the IBM model of selling, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So you sell fear, and based on fear, then you can manipulate policy. And young kids are being used in this process. I know we're going to talk about gun violence, but if you look at every major issue of our time, be it gun violence, climate change, you go down the list, immigration, these policies and what's being taught to kids comes from the academic industrial complex, which is pay to play right now. It has nothing to do with truth anymore. It has to do with chasing grant money. And this is, you can follow the money. There's a video out there that I did on climate change you guys may have seen, and it essentially exposes, this academic industrial complex.
Wow. You know how they say never be the smartest person in any room? It's mission accomplished, right? Now, I want to bring Andrew in, and before I do, could we please give this man a round of applause for taking a tragedy and trying to prevent what happened to his daughter from happening to any of our kids? Please.
Thank you.
Thank you, because I think your accomplishments really need that kind of acknowledgement. And as a teacher, you don't know how much I appreciate what you do. And I don't want to put the tragedy of what happened to your daughter to the side, but I want to ask you this question first. Now, when I think of Parkland, one of the things that I do think of is the activist children, and I won't name them, but they're left-wing activist children, and the things that were coming out of their mouths sounded like left-wing talking points. It sounded like Debbie Wasserman Schultz herself coached them. And I wanted to know, did your daughter ever come home and say, hey, my teachers are teaching me something strange? Or where did that left-wing indoctrination come from? Because they were getting it from somewhere. I teach high school kids. High school kids are not that politically savvy, so.
Well, first of all, I was never into politics until this happened to me. And I got a big awakening and a real education. My daughter would never agree to any of this activism, but it didn't happen till after the shooting, because the Democrats politicized the whole Parkland shooting. The superintendent, the day after the shooting, was my daughter wasn't even buried yet. She was still in the morgue, and they were already pushing their anti-gun control, anti-NRA agenda before kids were even buried. So even yesterday at the University of Florida, March for Our Lives were protesting Donald Jr., and they were walking around the campus with a picture of my daughter in the protest. So that it's actually disgraceful what these people do. And I could tell you from experience, well, first of all, everyone always wants to know how I do this, get up here and speak. It's for the love of my daughter. That's what I do this for. And I honor her. And as I started to get educated and look into the policies, I started to despise Democrats more and more. And that fires me up too, because we need to fight and fight and fight these people that are very unethical, who push an agenda without looking at any facts or solutions. That's what I did in Parkland. I wanted to look into the facts of what happened, and it took me a year. You know, I didn't just jump on a bandwagon of what the mainstream media wanted. Okay, I wanted to look in. My daughter would want to know, would want me to tell everybody and find out the facts of what happened in Parkland. And when I started looking into it, the multiple failures, it came to me that it really started with the Obama administration, where they wanted to end the school-to-prison pipeline. And that's where this happened. They wanted to end suspensions, end expulsions, and stop arresting kids with no consequences. And people started writing me like letters. We knew this kid was going to be the shooter. We knew he was evil. But meanwhile, he was never arrested. I could tell you stories we found out recently. They had to frisk the shooter every morning before school. And he wasn't allowed in with a backpack. But they'd never told the parents, you know, but this is what my daughter had to go to school with. A kid so violent they had to frisk. So these policies, you know, just for instance to tell you, because I'm involved with it, right now the state of California signed a bill that it's against the law to suspend or expel disruptive children. So even, you know, I try to even explain it. Even if you're a Democrat, would you want your kid to go to a school where there's a disruptive kid next to them, where they have no consequences? And the problem is why we need to bring attention to this is because it's the platform of a lot of these Democratic presidential candidates to bring these policies and push them into these schools throughout the country. And, you know, we're all here, we support our president, and I'll bet you no one out here knows I met with the president a week after he accommodated me, and I went into the Oval Office in a private meeting, and he formed a federal school safety commission with his secretaries in his cabinet. And after 9 months of doing research, he rescinded these Obama-era leniency policies, which meant so much to me. The problem is that, because I get so much hate from so many people, they go, well, what did the president do? What could he do? Well, he did more than any other administration has ever done prior. But the problem is, he's at a federal level. You know, I'm friends with Rick Scott, Ron DeSantis. They would do anything they can to make your kids safe at your local school districts, but they can't help you at a local level. It all boils down to your local school boards, and who controls a lot of these local school boards are these unethical Democrat bureaucrats that push these policies on our children and create these chaotic environments. So it's a big problem, and these Democrats that are running now in 2020, they want to actually bring these policies back because they think these policies are helpful to our children. And Biden wants to bring it back, Beto O'Rourke. So it's very important that we get out and we're a voice in 2020 and we give President Trump another 4 years. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Andrew, I just had a follow-up for you. Did Meadow know the shooter?
No, she didn't know the shooter. And to get even. So he threatened to kill in middle school. He was so violent, he wanted to kill people. They had to tie his desks down. He was skinning animals. And all this, and they still put him in the school with my beautiful daughter. And it hurts me to say it, my friend Ryan Petty, he's in the back. His daughter, too, was killed on the first floor. And we have to live in this pain forever. And it was the most avoidable school shooting or mass shooting in the country. And it just kills me that a lot of these at these local levels, well, they still have these policies. So my message would be to any parent, grandparent out there to read my book, Why Meadow Died, because me and Ryan, we didn't know what was going on in our kids' school. We didn't know there was a kid so violent in the school they had to frisk him. And Ryan and myself talk about it, but parents now, you have no excuse to put your kid in an environment like I did and like my friend Ryan, because there's options. There's private schools, there's charter school, and there's homeschool. Don't just think you're going to put them in a school and they're safe.
You know, I can tell you that in New York, they also have a version of that Obama Promise program, which is brand new. So if a principal suspends a child, it goes on their rating. And if they get a negative rating, they can be removed. So it's an ongoing problem.
Correct. They used to get, like you mentioned, grant money. The less expulsions, the less suspensions, the less arrests. Yeah. They would get more grant money, but that they ended it now, and our great president ended it. But that's why we need to spread. He didn't get any credit. I could tell you, I was with the president. He takes so much crap from so many people all day because I was with him in the White House, and for an hour we went over. We're in the room. Ryan was with me. There were other parents in the room, and we were discussing the Federal School Safety Commission, and the media was out. And we were at a table with other parents that had kids murdered and his secretaries, and we discussed for about an hour how important this school commission, these recommendations. He made over 100 recommendations to make the children safe. And then he goes to the media, he goes, do you have any questions about, what we just talked about school safety? And their only question to him was, Mr. President, are you still going to close the government down? And he looked at me, he goes, Andy, he goes, can you believe this is what I got to deal with day in and day out with this media? And it's the truth. Whatever you hear him say about this fake news and how they treat him, it's the truth. I wrote my book, Why Meadow Died, and I went on a book tour in, New York, Washington, Florida. I was all over the place. Not one mainstream liberal channel would put me on to tell the truth of what happened in Parkland, because I wasn't going to push their agenda of gun control and blame the NRA. I only had facts. So if you watch Fox News, you'll know the truth of what happened in Parkland.
Now, Dr. Shiva, I want to bring you in. Now, I graduated in 1992, so if you're good at math, you can figure out my age, right? But we were bullied. We never thought to take a gun to school and perpetrate violence. We might have wished that the bully would fall into a plate of mashed potatoes or something like that, but what's making kids so violent?
Getting back to the issue of gun violence, there was 40,000 people a year die of sepsis, for example, in Massachusetts, one state. 40,000 people die of quote-unquote, I'm going to put it in double quotes, gun violence. About $100 million to $500 million is funded for researching sepsis, which is infection. Less than, I think, $2 million is invested in understanding quote-unquote gun violence. So if you go up on PubMed, you'll see about 120,000 papers written on sepsis, but only about 400 papers written on the origin of gun violence. And most of those papers are what are called single variable papers. You take a very complex system and you reduce it to one variable, like CO2 is a pollutant. Forget about, we have a very complex system. Well, in gun violence, that's what they do. They reduce it to one system. Oh, take away the guns, right? One variable. There was, however, one great, brilliant study done by a woman which found that there were 5 factors that cause quote-unquote gun rampages. One being the fact that the teachers weren't surveillancing the kids, they see something wrong, disenfranchisement from the family, drug usage, one being access to weapons, and the other being psychotropic drugs. And what her research concluded, it's very fascinating, is that if you remove any one of those, you can stop these rampages. Not all of them, any one. So, however, the media always focuses on only one of them, which is take away our guns. I think as you mentioned, even if you took that one particular thing where you had a child who there's clearly evidence something's wrong, so in that case there was a failure of the school system. But her research never gets talked about. However, what we talk about is a Harvard School of Public Health research which says take away the guns. By the way, that's where David Hogg is, right, at Harvard. So none of these things are coincidental, because the academic elite, they're essentially the back-end function to the fake news right now. They know once fake news breaks down, they're going to complicate things, and the academia is going to be their secondary to come in. And that's what I think we should watch out for. Sure. And that's why in all of these issues, the academic establishment is what's hunkering down. And that's why I think Elizabeth Warren, if she gets a Democratic nomination, is going to be quite fascinating, because she represents the epitome of that entire establishment.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on, like he mentions, gun violence. Democrats, which you all know I don't really like them, Democrats push the word gun violence and background checks, okay? Well, if you don't arrest kids when they threaten people's lives, or when they trespass out of school, or they punch their mother's teeth out, there is no background that works. A background check won't work if these Democrats push these policies of not arresting. So my daughter's murderer should have been arrested numerous times. He also threatened to kill himself. There's laws in place where we have a Baker Act to the full extent where if you're a threat to yourself or others, you should be committed, okay? We have laws in place that would protect us. And it failed with my daughter, because he never received a background, okay? Never was arrested. The same with the Dayton shooter. They don't tell you that the Dayton shooter recently in the mass shooting, he was in school. They all knew he was going to be a killer. He threatened people's lives. He had a rape list, but never arrested. So Democrats, they talk about gun violence, they talk about background checks, but that isn't the solution. We need to arrest people when they threaten people's lives, okay? So they have a background check. And the mentally ill, when they're a threat to themselves or others, should be committed, so that'll go on their background also. And then we'd have a much safer country.
Right, the background check system, right? It's only as good as the information that's in it. So now, Jonathan, you literally wrote the book on safety. You literally did. And, he just happens to have it. Here's the thing. I've been in a lockdown situation that, thank goodness, was a hoax. It's terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. And what we teach teachers and students to do is lock the door, be very quiet, sit up against the wall, and don't say anything and wait for someone to let you out. And I know that you don't agree with that. And I want to know from you, what are we doing well? What can we do better? What would you recommend?
Well, I mean, sheltering in place is only good if you have a system on, first of all, how to keep the shooter out of a place. Now, the difference between a school and other soft targets, and when I got out of the SEAL teams, I was part of a site assist visit team that went all over the country for Homeland Security looking at these vulnerabilities. That was in 2004. And we were screaming at that point of how we need to stop the shooters from getting into places. But soft targets by nature invite people into their facilities, so it's going to be difficult. A hard target is something like a government building or a federal facility or a military base. Those are hardened targets where they have security, and not just mall cops. They have real security that is they'll kill you if you come on there and try to start something. Well, the interesting thing about schools, as opposed to all the other soft targets, I would put churches in this category. You can't put malls into this category, but churches and schools can literally be locked down. And you can literally keep people from getting into the school. The other thing is, these are particular places where extreme vulnerability happens, because you're telling the students, stop thinking for yourself, shut your mouth, and look in this direction and do as I tell you all day long. So nobody is looking around to see if there's anything there. And I know many of the schools in New York have former cops as security officers, but they're not even armed. They're not allowed to carry a gun onto the premise. Now, threat assessments are the number one thing that I think should be done above and beyond anything. A threat assessment, if it's done properly, will tell you how an attacker sees that target, what the vulnerabilities are that they'll exploit, the avenue of approach they'll take to get to that, and the particular times and places that are most vulnerable. If you don't do that from the attacker's point of view, you will never set up a proper defense, which is why you see policies that are set up based on ideology and not what's effective, right? It's the same thing as hiring a pilot because it's a woman and you feel like you need more women, rather than whether or not she's got 1,000 hours of flying experience, or a male for that matter. You don't hire people based on ideology or numbers. You hire them based on whether or not they can do the job effectively and have the experience. It's the same thing for security. And that number one, thank you very much. Number one, that is the thing that we need to start doing, is these threat assessments. And here's the interesting thing about it. It literally does not hardly cost anything at all. It's the cheapest thing that you can do to secure your schools. Once it's done, you figure out how to lock those systems down. And one other thing I'll say is there's literally millions of veterans out there that have been trained to carry and use weapons safely. There's literally millions of former law enforcement officers. Even if a cop was just a cop for 3 years, the government said, you are safe and experienced enough to carry a weapon in front of the public. But yet, they won't let those people volunteer to stand at a school, lock the school down, and then stand there free of charge, mind you, because I know plenty of veterans that would do this, and stand there and protect the school from a shooter. If you increase these policies, you fix the policies, and you lock the schools down, you will never have an effective school shooting ever again. It's that simple.
Right, and absolutely, I agree with you. Now, we're running very, very low on time, and we really could have gone for about 2 hours. We didn't even touch upon gender identity, hardly touched upon climate change. There's so much that we could go into when it comes to school indoctrination. So I'm going to give all of you a minute to give us your final thoughts, and we'll start with you, Andrew.
Well, my final thoughts would be to every parent and grandparent to read my book, Why Meadow Died, because I wouldn't want you to put your loved one, your child, in a situation like I did with my daughter. There's a good chance that your child's not going to get shot in a school, but you just put them in an environment that you wouldn't want them to, just where it's chaotic, and it's just not the right place to put a child in. And it's mostly in these public schools that's going on. Not every public school, but a lot of the public schools have these policies. And I just would urge the parents and grandparents to look into it so they just know what's going on at their kids' school.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Shiva?
You know, my family came from an India which had a caste system. Everyone heard of this? A caste system is a few set of people who think they know better than everyone. They were called the Brahmins, and we were considered the untouchables. So the fact that my parents came to the United States in 1970 was quite extraordinary. You won't find a lot of Indians like me. But what is happening to this country is a neo-caste system of a set of people who think they know better than everyone else, and that we're all stupid and we're supposed to listen to them. And those are these people who want to indoctrinate all of us, and as I mentioned, they're part of this academic establishment. What the good news is, everyday working people, people who work with their hands, or people who are nurses, who actually do something with their lives, who work with nature's laws, they are not getting fooled by this. And that's the over 50% who voted for Donald Trump. And what really bothers these people is that everyday people actually have common sense. And this set of indoctrination is based on a set of vulnerable elites, young people going to college, who are learned to please their professors because they have to get an A because they have a $200,000 loan. And their professors, by the way, as I mentioned, are practicing the oldest profession, which means they have to get grants and they have to please someone else. So the entire model of education has been people-pleasing, not doing critical thinking. And I think the opportunity is that to recognize that we have a caste system in this country, an aristocracy. The good news is Donald Trump, dropped a big bomb on that. And everyday working people are really the force that has common sense. So I'm actually quite optimistic because we have people who still work for a living.
Jonathan, final thoughts, real quick.
So here's the bottom line of all this, of what we're all saying up here, is that, like Dr. Shiva just said, you are the answer. The founding fathers over 243 years ago realized that you are the answer. Not school administrations, not the government, not federal law enforcement and the intel industry and the media and all these people. You are the answer. You're powerful. If you want threat assessments done in your school, then you should go and stand and look how many people in here. Do you realize most of these protests that you see on CNN are like 20 people, right? And they block an entire freeway. Why aren't you all doing that? Why aren't the constitutionalists doing that? Block some of these people's spaces. Don't let them go to work. Don't let them go to the TV so they can act a TV station so they can do their news. Get your word out and get these policies changed. Make sure that there's threat assessments in your life, not just your school. And I'm not just going to say this because Andrew and I both have books, but I'm going to tell you this. You can go buy, you may be big readers, and you may be seeking information on how to make your life better and more secure. Get his book, get my book. Read these two books, and I can guarantee you what you will see is what's going on in the school system, what's going on in this country, policy-wise that you can affect, and my book will help you actually sit down and dissect your life so that you can see and then go to the school systems and say, this is why we need a threat assessment. If you do those two things and then you act, which is the biggest thing, because as we always say in the military and in law enforcement, action beats reaction. Stop reacting, start acting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. You are the solution. You have to get involved in your children's education. You have to be loud. The left is loud. The left is really loud. You have to get loud and you have to get involved. God bless you, everybody. Thank you for coming here today. Thank you.